The first time a man like Marco Belandi walks into your bakery, you don't know he's a man like Marco Belandi. You know his coat is too clean for the neighborhood, his eyes are too still for a Tuesday morning, and he chooses the one table nobody ever picks because the seat faces the alley instead of the window. I slid a coffee across the counter with my mouth already half closed, the way I'd trained it to sit for 11 years, and I felt him look at me the way a careful person studies a room before deciding whether to trust it. I'm Eliza Warren. I run Warren Street Bakery in East Boston. 4 ovens, 3 mixers, 1 cracked front tooth I've hidden since I was 17. 2 nights ago, in a house full of people wealthier than my whole street combined, a man kissed me before a room full of strangers could finish laughing at my mouth. I need to tell you how that happened, because the kiss wasn't the miracle, and Marco wasn't the miracle either. What came after, in an empty bakery on a rainy Friday, was the part I never saw coming. If you have ever bitten the inside of your cheek to stop a laugh from escaping in public, if you have ever practiced a mouth in a bathroom mirror until it looked polite enough to survive a stranger's glance, stay with me. There is a moment coming where I finally didn't cover mine. It wasn't the moment you'd think, and it wasn't the man you'd expect, and it wasn't inside anybody's mansion. Back to that first morning. I remember it because I remember everything about the bakery, the way people remember their own kitchen ceiling. Mrs. Delaney had come in for her Wednesday rye. Miles, my brother, had texted me the picture of his first paycheck from the auto shop, the one that meant I could finally stop wiring him rent every second week. My mother Ruth had a cardiology appointment at 11 that I was driving her to, and a stranger in a charcoal coat sat in the corner watching the alley door like it might speak to him. He didn't order anything sweet, just black coffee and a piece of the rosemary loaf I'd nearly burnt because the timer on oven 3 lies to me by 90 seconds. He ate half of it, drank the coffee cold, and paid in exact change out of a soft leather wallet that had clearly outlived several other men. He said, "The bread's good," and I said, "The oven disagrees," and I felt the corner of my mouth twitch. I turned toward the display case before the twitch could become anything more. He came back Thursday. Same coat, same table, same alley. This time he asked me when the milk truck came. I told him 5:30, and he wrote nothing down and forgot nothing. He asked when the linen guy showed. Wednesdays before 8. He asked when the neighborhood woke up, and when the last delivery slid past the back door, and I told him those too, because in my neighborhood you answer polite questions and file the reason later. By his 3rd visit, on the following Monday, I'd figured out 3 things. He always sat with his back near a wall. He never looked at his phone unless it buzzed twice. And when a lean man in a dock worker's jacket cut through the alley behind my kitchen, my customer went absolutely, unnaturally still for the length of one long breath before his shoulders eased down. He didn't tell me who the man was. I didn't ask. In my neighborhood, you learn early not to ask questions whose answers make you a witness. That night, my sister Bethany called from her new apartment across the river to tell me she'd made rent by herself for the 2nd month in a row. I sat on the flour-dusted step behind the counter and cried for maybe 40 seconds. Miles, independent. Bethany, independent. Ruth, stable, if tired, if slower on stairs than she used to be. For the first time since I was 19, the ledger in my head had a small, quiet corner that read, in nobody's handwriting but my own, the single unfamiliar word, yours. I didn't know what to do with a column marked yours. I looked in the mirror behind the register and tried, just once, to smile without covering it. The broken corner of my front tooth caught the fluorescent light like a chip of glass. My hand went up before I even decided to raise it, and I watched it happen in the reflection like it belonged to another woman. Old habits are just newer scars pretending to be manners. The next week, the man in the charcoal coat came back and did something new. He stopped watching the alley. He looked at the display case instead and asked me which loaf I was proudest of. And when I said the sourdough with black olive because it took 3 days to make and nobody ever ordered it, he ordered it. That was the morning I asked his name. He said, Marco. He didn't offer a last name. I didn't push. Before I keep going, if this is the kind of story that pulls you in, do me one small favor before we get to the part where the room laughs. Tap the like button and hit subscribe. I write these for people who know how it feels to hide something small in front of a room full of people who wouldn't understand why it costs so much. If that's you, you're the reason I keep telling them. Weeks turned into months. Marco Belandi, and yes, by month 2 I knew the full name. Everyone on the harbor knew that name. Kept coming. Twice a week, sometimes 3. He drank his coffee too slowly. He asked me one morning about my supplier for eggs, and I told him the truth, which was that my egg guy had raised his prices twice in a year for no reason I could see. Marco frowned at his coffee and said suppliers only raise prices twice when they smell fear. And I told him no, they raise prices twice when they smell loyalty, because loyal customers don't leave. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "You're right." Just that. Not interesting point, just, "You're right." Like he was surprised to hear a sentence he hadn't already thought of. That was the morning something shifted between us, though I couldn't have named it then. He started asking me things after that, about which vendors on the block gouged newcomers, about which landlord shorted heat in February, about which corner store rewrote its prices every time a tourist got lost inside it. He asked about my mother's cardiologist once, because he'd watched her walk out slowly and understood, without me saying a word, that my whole rhythm bent around her schedule. He never asked about my teeth. Not once. That was the thing I noticed most, because I noticed everyone who didn't. Most men either stared or pointedly didn't stare, and both were their own kind of looking. Marco just met my eyes when I talked, and let my mouth do what it did. By August, he was there so often the regulars stopped whispering. By September, my brother Miles asked me over Sunday dinner whether the quiet guy in the corner was, in his words, a boyfriend or a problem. I told him neither. Ruth stirred her coffee and said quietly, "A man who comes back 3 times a week without touching you isn't nothing." I told her to eat her manicotti. Bethany kicked me under the table. My mother has always understood men better than she pretends to. The truth was I didn't let myself want anything. Wanting was a luxury I'd loaned to Miles and Bethany and my mother, and I hadn't asked for it back yet. But Marco kept sliding coffees back across the counter with a folded napkin under them, some observation about a supplier or a permit dispute jotted in careful handwriting on the back. Small currency in a language I understood better than I'd realized. Respect first, everything else after. And every napkin note, if I'm honest, ended up in the shoebox on my top closet shelf where I keep the receipts my life turned on. Then in early October, he asked me to cater a private dinner at his estate. I laughed, actually laughed, a real one that got halfway out before my hand slapped over my mouth. "I'm a bakery," I said through my fingers. "I do bread. I do olive loaves. I don't do 6-course. He watched me lower my hand. He didn't look at what I'd covered. He looked at my eyes, the way he'd looked at them across 8 months of steady mornings. And he said, "I don't want 6 courses. I want someone in the room whose judgment I trust." "You want me to spy on your dinner guests," I said, "because saying the ugly version out loud is how I test whether a room is safe." He shook his head once. "I want you to feed them, and to tell me afterward what you saw. If you say no, I'll bring in a caterer, but I'd rather have you." He named the fee. It was more for one night than the bakery cleared in a week. He named the party. The Very family, old money, harbor interests they wanted to fold into his. And he named the reason again, slower, like he wanted me to hear it clean. He'd rather have me. I said yes before I fully decided to. The honest reason was that a man had meant my judgment, not my body, and my ribs did something small and startled I didn't have a name for. He spent Thursday afternoon in my back kitchen, walking me through the shape of the meeting. The Very side, led by a man named Lorenzo, would push for exclusive access to 3 specific piers under a preferential rate. Marco's official proposal to them was one number, his true floor, The lowest number he would accept before walking away was another figure entirely, 22% lower. Only 4 people in his organization were supposed to know it. He named the 4 out loud, sitting at my kneading table with flour on his sleeve. Himself, his accountant, his attorney, and Paul Serrano, his harbor lieutenant of 12 years. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. He said, "Because you're the one carrying the coffee. You'll hear what the guests say when they think you can't hear." He asked me to signal him if any of them ever quoted a number close to his floor. We rehearsed the signal at the kneading table, 2 fingers brushed lightly across the back of his shoulder as I refilled a cup, once, twice, 3 times. I nodded like I was calm. I was not calm. I lay awake that night counting ceiling cracks until Ruth's alarm went off through the wall. Friday came fast. Marco sent a car. The Belandi estate sat behind a stone wall in a neighborhood where the trees knew how to keep quiet. I carried in my trays through a service door with 2 of my part-timers, Rosa and Danny, both of them wide-eyed at the marble in the foyer. The housekeeper looked at my apron and then at my mouth and did the polite quick glance and away that told me exactly what kind of night I was walking into. Then Marco came down the back stairs in a suit that fit like it had been sewn to him, and he took a tray out of my hands like I was any other guest, and he carried it to the sideboard himself while the housekeeper's mouth opened slightly. He said, "Eliza, this is my staff. My staff, this is Eliza. She's baked for me every week for 8 months. Anything she asks for tonight, she gets first." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The housekeeper's spine straightened by a full inch, and Rosa gave me a look that said she'd remember this dinner longer than I would. Then the Very party arrived. There were 4 of them. Lorenzo Very walked at the front, silver hair, a jaw that looked designed by a lawyer. His cousin, his accountant. A younger nephew who kept his hand near his jacket. They shook Marco's hand and looked past him at the room, and then at me carrying a platter of focaccia to the long table, and I felt the 4 of them mentally file me into whatever cabinet held the word caterer. Lorenzo's eyes lingered a half-second on my mouth before moving on, and I felt the old flinch climb my spine 1 vertebra at a time. Dinner started civil. I moved. I refilled. I kept my ears open and my mouth mostly closed. Marco asked me twice, in front of the whole table, what I thought of the way the ports were being renegotiated up the coast. Both times Lorenzo's eyebrows moved. The second time, silky as oil, he said, "Ms. Warren, I didn't realize the caterer had opinions on international shipping." I said, "I don't. I have opinions on suppliers who inflate rates when they smell desperation, and ports work the same as flour." Marco didn't smile, but something around his eyes did. Lorenzo watched me for a long minute after that. He watched me the way a card player watches the one hand at the table he hasn't figured out yet. And then, over the second course, when the room had settled into wine and the accountant had begun to laugh a little too easily at his own jokes, he did the thing. He told a story. A funny one, tuned to the room, about a small-town baker upstate who'd mistaken a shipping clerk for a mob accountant and delivered 8 dozen cannoli to the wrong warehouse for 6 weeks straight. He told it well. He told it aimed at me. Every landing, every punchline, his eyes swung to my face like a spotlight, and the other men at the table had already understood what he was doing before the second beat. I felt the laugh trying to come. It always tries to come at exactly the wrong moment. That's the tax on being someone who taught herself to smile with her lips pressed shut. I felt it climbing up my throat, and I felt Lorenzo's eyes waiting for it, and I felt the shape of what would happen the second the broken tooth caught the chandelier light. I turned my face. I lifted my hand. I was 3/4 of a second from covering my mouth when Marco stood up. He didn't hurry. He didn't glare at Lorenzo. He walked around the corner of the table like he was going to refill his own water glass, and he stopped in front of me. He didn't grab my wrist. He touched the back of my hand with 2 fingers, the way you touch a bird you're not sure will stay, and he lowered it slowly, only as far as I let him. He paused, a full second, maybe 2. long enough that I could have pulled away and no one in the room could have said he'd forced me. I didn't pull away. He leaned down and kissed me. Not a show kiss, a quiet one, the kind that doesn't ask the room's permission because it has already stopped needing it. His hand cupped the side of my jaw without pressure. When he stepped back, the room understood exactly what had just been declared, and no one, not a single one of them, laughed. Lorenzo's smile stayed frozen a beat too long before it rearranged itself into something diplomatic. His nephew stared at his plate. The accountant reached for his wine. Marco sat back down across from me like nothing extraordinary had happened and said, very calmly, "Please continue your story, Mr. Very. I believe you'd reached the part about the cannoli." Lorenzo did not continue the story. I could have fled to the kitchen after that, every muscle I had wanted to. Instead, I picked up my tray, refilled the bread basket, and stayed in the room. Because I'd spent 11 years being invisible in my own life, and I was done letting a stranger in a $2,000 suit decide how much of a person I got to be at his table. Which is exactly why I was still standing 3 feet behind Marco's chair, silent as furniture, when the negotiation restarted over coffee, and I heard Lorenzo Very quote a number. The number. Not the official proposal. The floor. Marco's 22% lower absolute limit floor, spoken aloud by a man who should not have known it existed. Lorenzo said it casually, dressed up as a suggestion, as if his side had done the math and arrived there by luck. My hand tightened around the coffee pot until my knuckles went white against the porcelain, and I forced my face back to neutral before anybody caught the tell. I stepped forward to refill Marco's cup, and I brushed the back of his shoulder with 2 fingers as I poured, once, twice, 3 times, the small private signal we'd rehearsed the day before, and I whispered, so quiet that only he could hear it, the number he just said. That's yours. Marco didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His whole face changed in the way stone changes when the sun finally hits it directly. He set his cup down. He leaned back. And he did not concede. He said, "Interesting figure, Lorenzo. Not one I've offered." He said, "Before I entertain it, I'd like to understand what alternative arrangements you've built that justify your confidence." He said, "Because if that number is your floor, we both know you have less leverage than you're pretending to have. And if it's mine, then someone at this table has been reading my mail." He said it pleasantly, like a man offering a choice between 2 doors, both of them locked from his side. And I watched Lorenzo's face do the small, polite thing expensive faces do when the ground shifts. He tried to pivot. He tried to reframe. He tried to invoke other buyers, other options, other pressures, and Marco methodically dismantled each one. Because now that he knew Vetti's confidence was built on stolen information, every claim of leverage read like a card marked on the back. By the time coffee was cleared, Lorenzo Vetti had agreed to terms materially worse than the original proposal. Not the floor. Not close to the floor. He accepted them because the alternative was walking out of that dining room having overplayed a hand in front of witnesses. And men like Lorenzo would rather lose money than lose face. I stood behind Marco's chair the whole time. Not one of them looked at me, which meant not one of them noticed I was cataloging every phrase Lorenzo said, because something in the back of my head was starting to itch like a name I couldn't quite reach. He kept saying it 3 times in an hour. "We'll need to move the bread before the ovens cool." Once about the pier lease, once about a subcontract, once as a farewell handshake toss, like a saying he'd borrowed for the evening from somebody else's kitchen. I'd heard that phrase before. Not from any Very man. Not on television. I'd heard it in my bakery 6 or 7 months earlier, coming out of a mouth I trusted. Paul Serrano. Marco's harbor lieutenant of 12 years. He'd stopped in one morning for coffee, taken a phone call by the pastry case, and said into his phone, "Tell him we move the bread before the ovens cool," and laughed at his own joke about being in a bakery when he said it. I remembered it because that was the morning I'd smiled without covering my mouth for the first time in a month, and then remembered myself and pretended to be checking the register. I didn't say anything until the guests had left and the last car had cleared the gate. Then I walked into Marco's study with a coffee pot still in my hand, and I told him. Everything. The phrase, the morning, the phone call by the pastry case. He closed his eyes, just for a second. He did the math out loud, quietly, the way careful men speak to themselves. Serrano had access to the floor price. Serrano used the phrase. Very now used both. The pattern completed itself in front of him like a photograph developing in a chemical tray on the desk between us. Then he opened his eyes and said, "Eliza, sit down. I owe you a truth." That was the moment the ground moved a second time, and I didn't see it coming. He told me that the first 3 times he'd walked into my bakery, back in February, he hadn't come for the bread. One of Serrano's couriers had been using the alley behind my kitchen as a drop point. Marco had been watching the alley from my corner table because it was the cleanest sightline on the block. The bread had been camouflage. My name on the receipt had been camouflage. Me, apparently, had been camouflage. But by the 4th visit, he said, voice careful, the courier had switched routes, and I already knew that. I didn't need the corner table anymore. I sat at it because I wanted to see you again. Every visit after the 3rd was mine, not the organization's, mine. I set the coffee pot down on his desk. My hand was shaking, not with rage exactly, with the bruised feeling of learning the beginning of a story you'd loved was written in a language you hadn't been shown. 8 months I thought something in the bread was worth coming back for, I said. Something in the bread was worth coming back for, he said. Just not the reason you were told at the start. And I should have told you the difference the moment the difference existed. I said, you kissed me in front of that room tonight, in front of those men, and I let you, because I thought I knew what your visits meant. They meant what you thought they meant, he said, from visit 4 onward. Marco, you don't get to time-stamp affection. That's not how it works for the person on the other side of the counter. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. That was maybe the only thing that saved us in that moment. He didn't try to make his silence sound noble. He just said, you're right, and I'll accept whatever you decide next. I walked out. I did. I got in the car he'd sent for me, and I rode back to East Boston with my forehead against the cold window. And I didn't cry until I was standing in front of my own bakery, in the dark, with the neon "closed" sign painting my hands red, as if the shop itself was warning me not to open the door yet. If you're still with me, and I hope you are, because this is the part where the story stopped being about a man saving me and started being about whether I could save the shape of myself, do one more small thing. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have gone back? Would you have let a man who told you the truth 8 months late finish the sentence? Or would you have locked the door and thrown the key into the harbor? I ask because I'm still not sure I got the answer right. But I got mine, and I got it my own way, and that turned out to be the only part of the story that mattered. I didn't answer his calls for 6 days. He didn't send flowers. He didn't send more couriers, more men with envelopes. He did nothing, which is the hardest thing a man used to fixing things can do. On day 3, Ruth came to the bakery. My mother, who has never in her life used the phrase reality check, sat down at the corner table, Marco's old table, and folded her hands the way she folds them when she's about to say the sentence I need most and won't want to hear. You look like you're deciding something you already decided, she said. I don't know that I have. You do. She sipped her coffee. You want to know if his lie ruins the year, or if the year ruins the lie. That's not fair, Ma. Life's not. She looked at me over the cup. Eliza, you've spent 11 years deciding what other people deserve. You get to decide what you deserve. But you have to actually decide, not wait for him to earn it, not wait for me to bless it. Decide. I made her another cup and sent her home in a cab, and I locked the front door 2 hours early. I sat at the corner table by myself, in the seat Marco had chosen back in February, facing the alley, and I tried to see what he'd seen. A brick wall, a dumpster, the corner of a fire escape. Somewhere out of frame, a courier, once, months ago, on somebody else's payroll. I thought about the shoebox on my closet shelf, the napkin notes stacked in it in careful handwriting, and I asked myself whether every single one of them had been camouflaged too, and I couldn't make the answer come out yes, no matter how many times I turned the question over. On day 6, I called him. I said, "Come to the bakery, after closing." He came. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring apology. He brought himself, in a coat lighter than the charcoal one, and he sat at the corner table, and he waited with his hands flat on the wood, like a man who understood he wasn't allowed to reach for anything yet. I set 2 coffees down between us. I did not sit across from him at first. I stood beside the counter so I could remember whose room this was. "I've been thinking about what you owe me," I said. "Whatever it is, yes," he said. "That's the wrong answer." I finally sat. "You don't get to blanket yes me into forgiveness. That's the same shape as the secret. You made a decision about what I could handle without asking me. I'm asking you to stop doing that." He nodded slowly. "Understood. So here's what I want. I want you to tell me out loud what you did. Not that you're sorry. What you did." He did. He said the words. Surveillance, alley, camouflage, bread. He didn't soften any of them. When he was done, he waited, hands still flat on the table for whatever came next. I said, "Serrano, removed from the organization, no violence. His access is frozen, his stake is stripped, and he's out of the harbor operation as of this morning. There will be no bodies, Eliza. Not in this story, not from me, not on you." I believed him. I don't know exactly how I knew, but I did. Some faces stop lying before they stop wanting to lie, and his had done that in the study the night of the dinner. I said, "One more thing, and this is the one I need you to hear." He said, "I'm listening." "You saw me hide my mouth for 8 months, and you never once mentioned it. I loved you for that. And then last night, on the way home, I realized you were already thinking about how you'd fix it, weren't you?" His jaw moved. He didn't lie. "I was going to offer to pay for the dental work, whatever it costs, whatever it takes. I thought—" He stopped. He started again. "I thought it would be a gift. It would have been a decision made about my mouth, without me." I leaned forward. "Marco, if I ever fix this tooth, and I might, it will be because I woke up one morning and I wanted to see the whole smile in the mirror, not because your world decided which teeth belong in it." "Then I won't offer." "Say the whole sentence." He held my eyes. "I won't offer to pay for your dental work. Not now, not later. Not as a birthday gift dressed up as a surprise. If you ever want it, you'll tell me, and I'll listen. And I'll ask you what you want the appointment day to look like. That's it." I sat back. My coffee was cold. I hadn't touched it. "Okay. Okay? Okay. Come back tomorrow. Sit at the corner table. Order the olive sourdough. We start from there." He came back. He sat. He ordered. And for a week we did what we'd done for 8 months before the dinner. Coffee, small talk, the quiet trading of observations, except now every sentence had the weight of things said out loud instead of assumed. Miles asked me on Sunday if the quiet guy was still around, and I said, "He's earning his corner back." Bethany laughed and said that was the most romantic thing I'd ever put into a sentence. Ruth said nothing, which from Ruth is the highest possible endorsement. I noticed small things over that week, the way I'd noticed small things about Marco for months. He walked to the bakery now instead of being driven most mornings, even the cold ones. He'd started asking me at the end of each visit whether he could come back the next day, out loud, every time, like a man deliberately overturning a habit of assuming access. Twice he sat quietly while I finished a phone call with my mother's pharmacy. Once he wiped down a table on his own way out and put the dish rag back exactly where he'd found it. 2 Fridays after our conversation at the corner table, we closed early because a storm had emptied the block by 4. I was wiping down the counter when Marco came in shaking rain off his sleeves. He'd walked, he said, from 3 blocks over. He'd wanted the walk. He sat at the corner table with wet hair, and I brought him a coffee, and he told me a story about his mother, one I hadn't heard. The way she used to eat lemon peel straight off the fruit and make a face like the sourness had personally offended her. He did the face. Marco Belandi, Mafia boss, harbor negotiator, the man Lorenzo Veri had gone silent in front of, made a lemon peel face across my corner table with rain still in his eyebrows, and a small piece of leaf stuck to the shoulder of his coat that neither of us mentioned. I laughed. A real one. The one I'd been catching in my teeth for 11 years. It came up out of my chest before I could reach it, and my hand started to rise, muscle memory, the old flinch, halfway to my mouth before I even knew I'd moved. And I stopped. I lowered my own hand. I put it back down on the counter beside the rag, palm flat, deliberate, like I was setting down a tool I no longer needed. I laughed with my whole face. I laughed with the broken corner of the tooth catching the overhead light. I laughed for a full 3 seconds without hiding a single one of them, and somewhere in the middle of it I realized I wasn't performing bravery. I was just laughing at the man across the counter making a lemon peel face on a rainy afternoon. Marco didn't lean forward. He didn't reach for me. He didn't say anything sweet. His expression did not change. He looked at me exactly the same way he'd looked at me across 8 months of coffees and napkin notes, and that was the part that finally broke something open in my chest, because it meant he'd been looking at that smile the whole time whether I'd shown it or not. I said, "You already knew." He said, "I've been waiting to be introduced." I couldn't answer for a second. My eyes were doing a thing that had nothing to do with the tooth. He reached across the table and pushed the coffee toward me, the way I'd pushed his across the counter on a Tuesday in February, and he said quietly, "Hi, I'm Marco. I like the sourdough." I said, "Hi, I'm Eliza. I run this place." That was the introduction. Not the kiss in front of the Veri party, not the negotiation reversal, not even the truth in the study. The introduction was a laugh at a corner table in an empty bakery, chosen out loud by me, in front of the one person who had never once needed me to hide it. And it belonged to me before it belonged to us. I want to tell you the tooth got fixed. It didn't. Not yet. I've made an appointment for next spring. On a Tuesday I picked myself, and I'll go because I want to, and I'll pay because I can, and I'll come back to the bakery afterward and open on time because that's what I do. Or maybe I won't go. Maybe I'll decide the small chip is a piece of my own history I'd rather keep. That's mine to figure out. Not his, not yours, not the room's. Ruth is stable. Miles bought his first car with his own money last month, a used Civic he polishes on Saturdays and refuses to let me pay a cent toward. Bethany got a promotion at the hospital where she started answering phones 2 years ago, and she called me at midnight to scream about it like a woman who'd finally believed something good could happen to her. The Veri family still does business with Marco, on the worst terms they signed for that Friday night, and they've never once quoted a number they shouldn't know since. Paul Serrano lives in New Hampshire now, running, I hear, a small marina. Alive, uninjured, financially reduced, which is the kind of ending men like Marco give to men like Serrano when they're trying to be someone new. Marco still comes to the corner table, twice a week, sometimes 3. He orders the sourdough. He asks about my egg guy, who has since dropped his prices, though Marco swears he had nothing to do with it, and I choose, on this one point only, to believe him. He never asks about my teeth, and when I laugh, which I do more of now than I did in all the years before combined, he looks at me exactly the same. If you made it to the end of my story, I want you to do the last thing I'll ever ask of you. Not for me, for the version of yourself that has been covering something up with her hand for longer than she can remember. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Somewhere out there is a woman who is one Tuesday morning away from putting her hand down for good, and your click is the reason the next one of these stories finds her. I'm Eliza Warren, I run Warren Street Bakery on Warren Street, where the ovens lie by 90 seconds and the sourdough takes 3 days, and a man in a charcoal coat once sat at a corner table pretending to watch an alley. 2 nights ago, in a house full of strangers, a man kissed me before the room could laugh. That kiss was not the ending. That kiss was the door. The ending was me, weeks later, laughing out loud in my own bakery, in front of my own mirror, at my own damn table, with my hand flat on the counter and the broken corner of a tooth catching a rainy Friday's overhead light. Nobody kissed me first that time. Nobody protected me from the room. Nobody lowered my hand for me. I did it myself.